Servus, Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. It is that time of the year again where Western intelligence services and the Western media, corporate, public and state-owned alike, they are telling us that there will be another conflict. And they're very precise with their prediction. They say in the middle of next week or something along those lines, very soon at least, we will have a hot conflict at our hands in the East. And of course, our dear American friends are once again trying to get us, the Germans, involved in this, just like they tried to do that, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so much, in former times. I want to bring to your attention once again the war in Yugoslavia, where German troops were active in a foreign country for the first time since World War II, under a Green Party foreign minister and a Social Democratic chancellor. But of course, these attempts to pull us into a sort of misadventure abroad have been increasing since 9/11 and also recently. And how does it look this time? Well, we gave, as I said in my last video, 5,000 helmets to the Ukraine, and we agreed to some sort of economic sanctions as if we didn't have those already. But just for you guys out there, even if Germany wanted to become active in this conflict, we really couldn't, because let's face it, our military is utterly incapable of going anywhere, doing anything except for humanitarian aid and running away. And not always that even, because our capabilities to evacuate fast often depend on our allies. But I don't want to talk about the capabilities of the German military, more the lack thereof actually, but I want to talk about this conflict in a broader sense. Of course, I also don't know what Vladimir Putin actually wants and what his true motives are. I also can't predict the future, but let's just say I'm getting a little bit suspicious and I'm growing sick and tired of this warmongering from the West and from NATO in particular. I mean, do you still remember the story about WMDs in Iraq? Or little children that were thrown on the cold, hard floor in Kuwaiti hospitals after the Iraqis had invaded? Yeah, that was under the other Bush. So when you look at NATO or the US, which is of course the dominant power in NATO, you see a troublesome pattern of going to war under false pretenses. And there is another pattern, and that is starting up stuff in other countries, in satellite states, and destabilizing other countries in generally. That is a game that the US really likes to play. But what are the stories that we read about in Western newspapers these days? They are all saying that Putin is preparing for war and he is moving all these troops to the border. And that is a clear act of provocation, and this is an aggressive act, and we must react accordingly, and so on and so forth. But what I cannot read in the Western media, or the German media at least, is how it should look like from the other side. What has happened during the last decade, or, well, since the fall of the Soviet Union, one might say. What are we doing there actually at the Russian border? That is something that is rarely brought up in the Western media in a critical light. So what were we doing actually? One country after another has been included into NATO. A lot of troops were moved there, and also a lot of very capable, very interesting military equipment was moved there. Of course, they said this is only to protect Europe from missile strikes from Iran. Yeah, right, because Iranians would fire rockets at Lithuania, sure. And NATO was conducting military exercise after military exercise, year in, year out, directly at the Belarusian or Russian border. And now you can say, sure, every country can decide for themselves what kind of defensive alliance they want to join, and they have the right to conduct these exercises on their own territory, right? Well, technically true, but just consider how the United States, for example, would react, and we have historic precedent for that. We know exactly how they have reacted, how they would react now also, if it was the other way around. Do you still remember, maybe even from your history class, the Cuban Missile Crisis, yeah? And what happened there? And now let's make it a little more realistic. I mean, that was, boomer times. Let's put it into the 21st century, right? Let's consider the following, just, for argument's sake. Let's just say that Mexico would all of a sudden think that it would be a really good idea to enter a military alliance with China, mainland China, not the Republic of China, of course. And as a strong symbol of friendship between the Mexican and the Chinese people, they would station 500,000 Chinese troops at the northern border of Mexico, just south of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California. They would build a lot of military bases there, and they would station a lot of missiles and rockets and all the good stuff. And of course, both in the Gulf of Mexico as well as in the Pacific, they would open up military harbors for all these nice submarines and Air Force carriers and destroyers and all that nice stuff from China. And then they would conduct a lot of military exercises directly at the border, several times a year. Maybe they would also fly into US airspace every now and then just to see if they can destroy something. All hypothetical, of course, just as a simulation. It's just a game, bro. Relax. So I'm sure that the United States would totally accept the sovereign right of the Mexican people to ally themselves with whoever they want and to host these foreign armies on their territory. I mean, hey, it's Mexican territory, sure. Of course, we all what the United States would do in such a case. This scenario is of course hypothetical, but if you think this is just crazy or a totally different thing than what we're seeing right now, then I have to politely disagree. This is pretty much exactly what is going on right now in the east of Europe. And the story wouldn't end there, of course. No, the Mexicans would say that California used to be their territory and the Americans stole it from them in an unprovoked surprise attack. And then the Americans would say that California is part of the US right now. And then the Chinese would say that they stole land from our allies and we are here to bring it back to our allies. And then, but I'm just really going crazy now, so this is just all in my head. This is just a crazy idea of mine. Maybe with some Chinese influence in California, they could stage some kind of coup there, some kinds of false flag, and then there would be a domestic conflict in California, and then maybe the state would be divided or something, and then the Chinese would move into California in order to give it back to the Mexicans, of course, only. Yeah, but that is just a crazy story, that really has nothing to do with reality, and it's also not really a comparison to what we see in the Ukraine. No, of course not. That is just me spinning some weird ideas around in my head. Don't listen to me. Plus, we all know there is no Chinese influence in California, right? Okay, but seriously, I've never been to Russia. I don't want to live there. I just know that their mentality is very, very far from what we have here in Central Europe. They're very different people. Of course, they're not a Western country. Of course, they're not a Western-style democracy. They're not a liberal, open society, sure. But they also get nervous when they get surrounded and when they get poked and when they get provoked all the time. And I really invite you to just have a look at all these NATO exercises that were conducted in recent years. And nobody in the West really criticized that because it would be provoking the poor Russians. But when they have some kind of military drill right now, then our media is going crazy. And that is a blatant double standard, and just imagine how our countries would feel like if there was a hostile military alliance that is starting to surround you. And I am also fully aware that maybe the Baltic countries or some Eastern European countries, that they don't really feel comfortable either when they're so close to Russia. I get that. Just look at what happened in Georgia a couple of years ago. I think that was in 2008. Yeah, not very pleasant. I get it. But I also think one has to realize what happened since the fall of the Soviet Union, how NATO was expanding towards the east, towards Russia, And I don't want to even go into that argument if the West really promised to the Russians that they wouldn't do that or that they just said that, but it is very clear that Vladimir Putin in the beginning of his reign extended his hand towards the West. He was very optimistic. He wanted good relations. He wanted peace and stability. And what do we have now? We have sanctions, we have aggression, and we have provocations on, let's say, both sides at least. And in my personal opinion, at least, the US has played a key role at escalating this. They are far away, there is an ocean in between, but they are stationing a ton of their military in Europe and they're expanding towards Russia, as I said. And also, they call on their allies to impose sanction after sanction after sanction against Russia, while they themselves don't care to do anything like that. But as I often said, there is no Germany, we are just an occupied territory and that's it. We are not a country in that sense, we are just a territory, an economic zone, so to speak. And that became very clear now when Olaf Scholz, our newly elected chancellor, was visiting the US and talked to the Biden administration. He kneeled, he received his orders, and he went home again to implement them, like the good little satrap that he is. I think that Olaf Scholz knows very well who rules Germany in reality. So what is my point really with this talk though? I already said that I cannot predict the future, I don't know what Putin really wants, and I don't know what happens next week. It does seem to me, however, that the West, and first and foremost the USA, they want this conflict to escalate much more than the other side. They have been building up to this for years and they didn't leave out any provocation and any chance to escalate. I also think that it would be really stupid for Russia to enter a hot conflict with NATO. I rather think that Biden has much more interest in putting the focus away from his miserable performance and his horrible popularity values domestically at home, and he rather wants to do what a lot of US leaders have done in the past. They want some sort of foreign conflict so that the media is occupied with that and there are stories of heroism and of success and whatnot, and then you can draw attention to that and away from your horrible situation at home. And when you look at how fast his popularity has dwindled, and there wasn't so much there to begin with, I think, then it is not a stretch, in my opinion, that he really wants that conflict badly. And I think that not only he has done that and he wants that, but that the West, or let's say the forces that rule in the West, they want that for a very long time already, and they have been building up to this. But more about this another time. Let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. Servus, Kameraden!